Welcome into OutKick the show. I am your fearless leader, Clay Travis. As you can tell from the background, I am not at home. I am in New York City, where we are doing an awesome event out at Liberty National for Tunnel to Towers. We will be raising a bundle of money for them to help first responders, military, police, firefighters, everybody who is dealing with injury or loss of life. All the people battling so hard for you. I will be out all shows tomorrow out at the golf course, also helping to raise money in the evening with a post-golf event. So FYI, just a little bit of a housekeeping here. I'll be live back with you on Thursday for OutKick the show in Nashville. But in the meantime, and also with our The Fade gambling special with Kelly Stewart. But in the meantime, coming to you on the Monday edition, we are taping. This is playing a little bit later. I just want to let you know, in the event that chaos happens, major news breaks, that's why I am not addressing it, because we are taping this at about 11 a.m. Eastern. On Monday, as we typically do, primarily focused on college football, and then I will move into the NFL, a bit of that. We'll talk lots of politics later in the week, but as we get closer, 22 days out from the election. If you want politics, I was on America's Newsroom this morning with Bill Hemmer and Dana Perino. And I will be on Fox Business, who knows what other shows, while I'm up here in New York City throughout the course of today, in addition to doing Clay and Buck for 3 hours from our main New York City studios. All that coming in your direction. So I want to say off the top as well, on Thursday on Clay and Buck, I gave out a Prize Picks pick, as I typically do every single week, and we hit 10-1, second 10-1 winner that we have had. And so I encourage all of you, go sign up right now, prizepicks.com, use code OutKick, and when you play $5, you will get back $50. It's very easy to play. All you have to do is pick more or less for a variety of different players out there. College football, NFL, playoffs are underway. Major League Baseball, you can mix and match a variety of different sports. You can have fun. It is an awfully cool app if you haven't downloaded it already. And again, play $5, you get $50. All you have to do is go to prizepicks.com and use code OutKick, and boom, you are well on your way to getting hooked up. All right. I was down in Knoxville, Tennessee over the weekend, watched Florida and Tennessee play in person. I'll give you my take based on being able to watch that game in person, which actually makes a big difference, but it was fairly far down the list of big games. And my goodness, if you are a college football fan, it was a cornucopia of excess, and we learned a great deal. As always, there is a starting 11 column from me up on OutKick. You can get thousands and thousands of ideas, of words of ideas that I had over the course of the weekend. Encourage you to go read that if you want more and you actually want to read as opposed to listen. But for those of you out there who want to listen, let's dive in. Biggest game of the weekend. By far, Oregon beats Ohio State by 1. Crazy ending. Credit to Dan Lanning and Oregon for getting an absolutely signature win that I think big picture puts them into the playoff. What do I mean by that? They may or may not end up in the Big Ten title game. I think they will. But if you look at the remaining 6 games that Oregon has going forward, I don't see any way that they lose even 2 of those games. And even if they lost 2 of those games, I think with Boise State and Ohio State as wins, given how good Boise State looks and how we expect Ohio State to look, I think Oregon's probably in the playoffs. So big picture in terms of what this means, Oregon is in a fabulous place to be able to make the college football playoff. And I want to tell you this. Listen to the final 6 games that Oregon has now, and tell me where you think they're going to lose based on what we've seen. Oregon concludes at Purdue, Illinois, at Michigan, Maryland, at Wisconsin, and Washington. Now, earlier in the season, even in the preseason, at Michigan looked like it might be a very difficult game. At Wisconsin looked like it might be somewhat of a difficult game. And Washington, we really didn't have any idea what to expect with Kalen DeBoer gone. But based on how those teams have looked so far this year, I don't have a lot of doubt about whether or not Oregon is at least going to go 5-1, and I think they'll be favored to go 6-0. They may be the only undefeated team we have at the end of the regular season, and they're in a very prominent position to be able to advance to the Big Ten title game, because I don't think there's going to be very many Big Ten teams that are able to get to 11-1, certainly not that many that can get to 12-0. So that is my big takeaway. Gabriel was fantastic, put himself in a position to potentially be able to contend for the Heisman Trophy down the stretch. Also, how about the Ohio State defense giving up nearly 500 yards of offense? That surprised me. I expected this game to be more of a defensive struggle than it was. Credit to Oregon for getting one of, if not the biggest win in the history of their program in the regular season. What about Ohio State? Ohio State, look, the Michigan game is not as much of a threat as I believe many people thought it might be. I think Michigan's an 8-4, 7-5 style team. And so I think Ohio State will handle Michigan pretty well. But boy, oh boy, we're going to get to Penn State in a moment. But on November 2nd, Ohio State's got to go to Penn State. That, to me, is a Big Ten title game elimination. And given Ryan Day's struggle in big games, I would be nervous if I were a Buckeye fan. And then also, what other games are out there? I think it's hard to expect Ohio State to be any worse than 10-2, even if they were to lose what I think is going to be a toss-up game at Penn State, because Ohio State has Nebraska and Indiana. I know Nebraska's 5-1. I know Indiana's undefeated, but those games are both at home. I don't see Ohio State really struggling there. Michigan's at home. Really, again, Penn State is the game. 10-2. So let's say Ohio State loses to Penn State. I think 10-2 is probably enough to get Ohio State into the playoff, but here's what would have me a bit nervous. You're probably going to have to go on the road and play against a really high-caliber opponent, and you're certainly not going to get the bye. And given what Ryan Day has been capable of in big games or not capable of in big games, I can see why Buckeye fans would be a little bit nervous based on this loss. Again, it's not hugely destructive. The polls barely moved. It's a 1-point loss on the road in a crazy Autzen Stadium. But what would have me a little bit nervous if I'm an Ohio State fan is it sets you up to lose to Penn State. And if you lose to Penn State, I think you're probably going to be that 9, 10, 11 seed in the playoff, which means you would have to go on the road against a power conference opponent, either someone in the Big Ten or someone in the SEC that might very well be able to match up with you in a difficult manner and take advantage of getting you on the road instead of the Buckeyes being able to advance to the Big Ten title game, potentially get the bye, and advance in terms of to neutral sites or, worst case scenario, get to host a home playoff game in that first round of the college football playoff. So that's what would have me a little bit nervous about that in general. How about Penn State? Let me tell you about Penn State. Got the overtime win, came back against USC, and I think Penn State now is set to make the playoff. I would be stunned at this point. Drew Aller, I know he threw 3 picks, but he looked like he's kind of rounding into shape. Nobody could cover your tight end. One of the most dominant games I've ever seen from a tight end. But if you look at this Penn State team, that I would be stunned if they lost any game other than Ohio State. I think they have a really good chance to beat Ohio State. Why does that matter? If you beat Ohio State and you get the tiebreak, given the remaining 6, I don't think that it's crazy to forecast Penn State and Oregon in the championship game for the Big Ten, which would mean you're playing probably for a 2 seed. Means you get to skip the bye, go into the knockout range of the top 8. Means you get to skip the having to host a home playoff game in the first round. Maybe you beat Oregon, maybe you don't. Be an incredibly compelling Penn State season. That game on November 2nd with Ohio State coming to town. And I'll talk about the election for just a moment when Pennsylvania is likely to have the determining factor for who wins this race. And on that Saturday, you are hosting Ohio State in Happy Valley. That is going to be one of the most consequential games in the history of Penn State athletics. There are a couple of games that could make you a little bit apprehensive before then, but the reason why this SC win was so massive is, to me, it put Penn State into the playoff. It would take a real collapse for them not to be there, and puts them in great shape, given that Ohio State now has a loss. You'd have the tie break. If you beat Ohio State, there's no way that Ohio State is going to get in over Penn State, because you'd have a 2.5-game lead on them, basically, even if you dropped one down the stretch. I know Indiana's undefeated. I know Nebraska's out there. There are a couple of teams that are kind of surprises in the Big Ten race so far. But to me, given the win, and again, I know SC's not great, that is massive, because it stamps Penn State to make the playoff and puts them in position, if they beat Ohio State in Happy Valley, to be in the Big Ten title game and bumping Ohio State out. What about SC? Lincoln Riley, 5-8 in his last 13. That's not getting it done. SC falls to 3-3. We're going to talk about LSU in a second. But what about Lincoln Riley? Again, 5-8 in his last 13. If you are a USC Trojan fan, do you feel like things are moving in a direction where the program is improving? I don't. Now, Oklahoma's fallen off, and we'll talk about them in a little bit against Texas. But I just can't get over what a mess SC has become in year one in the Big Ten. They look like a 7-5, 8-4 style team at best. There's still a bunch of games in that final 6. If you look at them and you're an SC fan, how many of those games do you feel like, hey, there's no way on the planet that we can lose them? I would be very nervous about the trajectory of the program if I were an SC fan. Speaking of SC, got the win, week 1, college football season, Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas, neutral site. LSU loses in week 1. 5 years in a row they've done it with Brian Kelly. When we leave that game, SC fans are saying, we're back. We're a major national contender. Meanwhile, LSU fans are saying, we're fed up with Brian Kelly. Fast forward, LSU is down big on the road against South Carolina. They fight back. They get the win. Late game performance. I felt like Ole Miss had this win, had so many opportunities to put LSU away, and then with roughly 30 seconds left on a 3rd and 10, a dart from Nussmeier, touchdown, go into overtime. You stack up Ole Miss, force them to kick, I think it was a 56-yard field goal, and then they call game, first play, overtime, boom, big-time throw, big-time catch, pandemonium reigns down on the Bayou. It's tough to beat LSU at night. Let's talk about Ole Miss for a second. The Rebels have never been to Atlanta. This was supposed to be their year to either make Atlanta or make the college football playoff. To me, the loss at LSU isn't as seismic as the loss against Kentucky earlier in the year. That loss at home to Kentucky makes basically there no margin for error at all for Ole Miss going forward. They have to run the table. They have to get to 10-2. They're going to have to beat Georgia in the Grove in order to make the college football playoff. So they have eliminated their margin for error. That's what the loss to Kentucky did. We're going to talk about Kentucky and Vanderbilt, Diego Pavia here in a moment, and how much fun he has been to watch as Vanderbilt went on the road and won again as a double-digit underdog back-to-back weeks after taking down Alabama. But Ole Miss now, no margin for error. They've got to win out. What about LSU? Well, despite the SC loss, LSU now is sitting very pretty in the SEC. Now, problem for LSU is I believe they have to go on the road at Arkansas, at Texas A&M over the next couple of weeks. I think they're going to lose at least one of those games, maybe both of them, because I'm not sold that LSU is a great team. But if they can split in that scenario, just go 1-1 there, they have a very good chance if they take care of business at home and beat the teams they should. LSU has a very good chance to be sitting at 7-1 in the SEC, which if you look at the rest of the SEC, 7-1 outside of Texas, how many teams do you feel like are going to go 7-1 in the SEC? I don't feel like very many. I feel like a lot of SEC teams are going to be in that 6-2, 5-3 range, honestly. And if I'm right about that, then if LSU can get to 7-1, they have a very good chance to advance to Atlanta and take on Texas, who just so LSU fans back loving Brian Kelly. How about Texas, the only dominant team in the SEC so far? I said at the start of the starting 11, again, I'll share that link. You can go read it, that we have to get to a new era where we presume that teams are going to lose, and we will see how Georgia does going on the road in a big game against Texas, because Georgia didn't look that good against Mississippi State. Texas has been the only team in the SEC that hasn't played poorly so far in this season. Doesn't mean the back half of the schedule they're going to play perfect, because there are a couple of games that look tougher than maybe you expected. At Arkansas, at Texas A&M, not easy. At Vanderbilt, maybe coming off of a big game against Georgia. That Texas schedule looks more difficult than maybe we anticipated early in the year. Remember, the last time Texas went to Arkansas a couple of years ago, they got whipped pretty soundly. Arkansas would love nothing more than to ruin Texas's season. We know Texas A&M in College Station, that final weekend is going to be pure bedlam. Absolutely bonkers there. So I don't feel like Texas is going to go undefeated. I do feel like if they can beat Georgia, they probably can get to 11-1, 7-1 in the SEC, which would stamp them for Atlanta. So big win. Exposed, I thought, to some degree, Oklahoma as just a mediocre team. I think Oklahoma, as I said after Tennessee beat them, felt to me like an 8-4, 7-5 style team. We'll see if the Sooners can change that forecast, but that's what I think about them right now. Okay, let's talk about two teams that I think, as they set up for a big game this weekend, neither fan base feels that confident about. Alabama, Tennessee. Let's start with Alabama. After the loss to Vanderbilt, I thought if you're going to argue this was an aberration, this was an all-systems failure, but Alabama is still Alabama, that the Crimson Tide would have come out and obliterated South Carolina in Tuscaloosa on Saturday. They didn't do it. In fact, Alabama was outgained total yardage, outgained rushing, outgained passing. They were out first downed. The reason why South Carolina lost this game is because they went in and had 4 turnovers. If South Carolina plays basically unforced error football, they would have beaten Alabama as a 21-point underdog in Tuscaloosa. In fact, now, when you look at the SEC performance so far of Alabama, they played one good half. I'm talking about just the SEC. Great half against Georgia. Otherwise, second half of Georgia, not very good. Entire game against Vanderbilt, not very good. Entire game against South Carolina, not very good. This looks like a non-playoff, non-SEC title contending team. The Alabama defense is not very good. The offense, if you can take Ryan Williams out of the game a bit, and if you have a linebacker who can spy Jalen Milroe looks like he's taken a lot of hits. He wasn't running full speed at the end of this game. He looked tweaked a little bit. If you can do that on the defensive side of the ball, I don't think this Alabama offense is that dynamic, and the defense is not very disciplined and not playing very well. So I think it's a complete toss-up game as Alabama goes to Tennessee, because guess what? I don't think Tennessee's playing that well. In fact, Tennessee on offense, I never would have believed it. Back-to-back first halves, 0 points at Arkansas, 0 points against Florida. I was there for this game, and I think the Tennessee failure boils down pretty simply to Nico is missing a ton of throws. He's a young quarterback. He is regressing. He missed a lot of throws against Arkansas that he should have made. He missed a ton of throws against Florida that he should have made. I was up in a box watching this game. I like to be present in the stadium if you're up high enough to see the field. I'm far from an X's and O's expert, but I can see when there are wide open receivers, particularly up from the all-22 view that you can get inside the stadium, and he missed so many wide open receivers. He's just not seeing the field very well. And I don't think you're going to get healthy against Alabama, which is why I like the under in this game, giving you an early preview for Alabama-Tennessee. I think it's going to be a 20-17 style, brutal battle, not a lot of positive offensive performance in either direction. I do think Tennessee has a pretty solid defense, and I think they will match up fairly well with Jalen Milroe, but I am not confident at all in Tennessee's ability to score points. And I'm not confident in the offensive line's ability to protect Nico. I was thinking that if Tennessee's performance against Arkansas was an aberration, that Nico would come out back at home, more comfortable settings, fling the ball all over the field. It didn't happen. Tennessee's got health issues at wide receiver. The timing is off. This is a precision, fast-paced offense that is not moving precisely and is not able to take advantage of going fast. I don't think Florida's very good. I think Billy Napier blew it when he didn't go for 2. Between you and me, this was not a difficult decision when they scored late. Credit to Lagway for making that pass on 3rd and 19 or whatever the heck it was. Entire stadium went silent. They then lined up in sort of the swinging gate formation. Tennessee took a timeout. Smart to get Tennessee to burn a timeout regardless. I would have come back out and I would have gone for it. I don't understand why Billy Napier didn't go for the win there. What happened in overtime is what I would expect to happen. Tennessee is the better, more talented team playing at home. I think that Billy Napier should have gone for 2 in that scenario. But right now, I don't feel confident against Alabama. I don't think Alabama fans feel confident against Tennessee. One of these teams is going to come out 6-1 and will feel good about the result, because 6-1 in the SEC, given what both teams have the rest of the way, keeps you alive for Atlanta, keeps you alive for the playoff. But I don't see anything that makes me very confident about Tennessee or Alabama performing at a high level. We'll see what happens 6 days from now in Knoxville. I want to tell you one bit of super positivity. Army and Navy are both 6-0. Ranked in the top 25 together for the first time since 1960. Go Army, go Navy. Question: could Army and Navy's success have something to do with, by and large, there not being transfer portal implications for those schools? It's much harder to transfer in and out of Army and Navy, given that you're a cadet and you are committed, a midshipman, you are committed to going into the service. So do they have more stability? I think that's an interesting question to contemplate. Also, this is crazy. They could meet in the American Conference Championship game the week before they meet in the Army-Navy game, which is always, remember, the week after conference championship. So there is a scenario where each of these teams could play back-to-back weeks. We could get back-to-back weeks of Army-Navy with the winner of the championship going into potentially the college football playoff, and then still losing the overall Commander's Trophy at the end of the season. Just something to think about that is an interesting wrinkle that I'm not sure a ton of people have contemplated going forward. Vanderbilt. I want to give a shout-out to Diego Pavia, who is playing at such an incredible high level. Vanderbilt is a lot of fun to watch. He is a Johnny Manziel-like player in terms of his running around the field and just finding ways to make plays. But they absolutely dominated, I thought, Vanderbilt did on the road against Kentucky. And that makes, I think, if you're an Ole Miss fan, that loss to Kentucky feel much worse, because Kentucky's only win in the conference so far is the road win against Ole Miss. Big 12 title race going to be an absolute mix. I've discussed that some in the starting 11. Let me go ahead and close out. Again, we're taping. Let me go ahead and close out with the college football analysis here. My top 10 right now, my OutKick top 10. I got the Texas Longhorns 1, Oregon 2, Ohio State 3. I didn't drop them much. Georgia 4, Penn State 5, Miami 6, Alabama 7, Clemson, which continues to run roughshod, hot knife through butter style through the ACC since that opening week loss to Georgia. Texas A&M 9, the Aggies, impressive in that win against Mizzou. I'm discounting a little bit that loss against Notre Dame because I think they've gotten substantially better since then. I've got LSU 10 after the win over Ole Miss. I would have Notre Dame 11, by the way. Tennessee 12 right now would be my top 12 if you're wondering about where I would rank teams. Iowa State, Indiana, I know you're undefeated, but I'm bumping you back down because I haven't seen the wins that would make me think, oh, this is a super impressive caliber of win. That means for my OutKick Playoff 12, this is up all over social media. You can go check it out. I would have Texas as my projected SEC champ, Oregon as my projected Big Ten champ, Clemson as my predicted ACC champ. I think Clemson would beat Miami if they were to play in the title game. BYU right now as my Big 12 champ, although I know you could make an argument for Iowa State. I know you could make an argument for Texas Tech. There's about 5 or 6 teams right now you could pick in a wide-open Big 12 to argue that you believe they are going to be the champion. Right now I've got BYU. I've got Ohio State 5. That would mean Ohio State would host a playoff game against Boise State, who is my non-power 4 team that I've got in. I've got Georgia 6. That means they would host LSU, who I have as my 11 seed. That would be a heck of a matchup down in Athens. I've got Penn State 7. They would host right now Texas A&M in my bracket as the 10 seed. And then I've got number 8 Miami hosting number 9 Alabama. That is my playoff 12 right now. If you want my SEC power rankings, I've got Texas number 1, Georgia 2, Alabama 3, Texas A&M 4, LSU 5, Tennessee 6, Missouri 7. That's the top 7, all with 1 or fewer losses. Then I have Vandy as my top 2-loss team, followed by Ole Miss, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and that's the 2-loss teams. Then we go with South Carolina, Kentucky, Auburn, Florida, and Mississippi State representing the final 5 in the SEC right now. It feels wide open, much more like the NFL in past years. There's a lot of parity in college football. Buckle up, another great weekend coming. Later in the week, I'll talk NFL. I had so much college football reaction that I wanted to get you guys in for. Encourage you again, remember, prizepicks.com, code OutKick, $50 when you play $5. That's prizepicks.com, code OutKick. I'll be back with you on OutKick the Show for double shows on Thursday, back from Nashville. Encourage you also, check out Tunnel to Towers if you're trying to make a difference. And I would encourage you to watch our Friday show. We helped to raise a bundle of money for everybody out there in Asheville. I did my Clay and Buck show from Asheville on Friday, and East Tennessee struggling, flew over in the helicopter. Talked a lot about that on Friday, live from Yeehaw Brewery. Thanks to everybody who came out. I met a ton of you, met a lot of you at the Florida-Tennessee game. Thank you for everybody who is helping to donate and make a difference there. Again, this is taped. It's going to be live a little bit later in the afternoon, but I will see all of you on OutKick the Show again on Thursday. You're going to see me on a bunch of Fox News shows for the rest of today. I'm up in New York City with Buck for Clay and Buck, which starts in about a half hour. This has been OutKick the Show. I will see y'all on Thursday. DBAP, unless you need to SBAP.